They say some prophecies sleep for decades, quiet, harmless, forgotten until the world shifts just enough for their words to rise again, like something exhaled from the deep. And tonight, as America stands in the strange twilight between certainty and collapse, one of Jeane Dixon's most unsettling visions has begun to stir. It is a prophecy she never spoke publicly, a warning she committed to paper only once, then tucked away beneath layers of coded language and symbolic images. A prophecy about a figure she described only as the Golden One, rising in the West, surrounded by applause and danger in equal measure. For years, those pages collected dust. People moved on. Elections came and went. The public forgot the strange woman who once walked the halls of Washington, whose visions seemed to break through the barriers of time, but the prophecy itself did not forget. And now, as America's divisions sharpen and the old foundations begin to tremble, the details Dixon left behind no longer feel like distant poetry. They feel like coordinates marking a point in time we may be approaching faster than anyone expected. It always begins the same way in stories like this, with a question whispered more than spoken. What if she saw something? What if the fragments she left behind were never just metaphors? Because before any mention of the golden figure, Dixon had already carved her name into American memory with predictions that refused to stay quiet. She wrote of a young, charismatic leader who would rise with hope in his smile and tragedy in his shadow. She described his height, his hair, his walk, even the exact year the nation would mourn him. John F. Kennedy. She spoke of Marilyn Monroe's sudden departure wrapped in mystery long before it happened, and decades earlier. She warned of danger awaiting a pope on foreign soil, danger that nearly claimed the life of Pope Paul VI in the Philippines. Each fulfilled vision deepened the unease. Each correct detail carved her further into the line between reverence and fear. And so when she later hinted at something or someone looming on America's horizon, her words carried more weight than she may have intended. She wrote of a man bathed in gold, whose rise would spark devotion and division in equal measure. A man carried forward by a force he believed he commanded, but which may have been steering him all along. For a long time, no one connected this imagery to anything in the real world. How could they? Dixon's language was symbolic, almost biblical in tone. She used light and shadow as metaphors, spoke of towers and temples, of storms that arrived without clouds. But the symbols were there, buried in her notebooks like seeds waiting for their season. And as the years passed, the world changed in ways that began to mirror those forgotten lines. The moment everything shifted can be traced to a single rediscovery. A collector sorting through private archives stumbled across one of her unpublished writings dated 1979. In its margins, barely visible under fading ink, appeared the phrase, "He will promise to make the Republic great again." It was strange, eerie, and to those who believe in signs impossible to ignore. She had written those words nearly 3 decades before Donald Trump would launch his political rise through that exact slogan. For some, it was coincidence. For others, it was confirmation that Dixon had glimpsed something far ahead of her time. But the prophecy did not end there. She described a great structure of gold, a tower gleaming in the sun, admired by many, despised by others. A symbol of wealth and ambition. A beacon, she called it. And then, she added one more line that would later spark endless debate. When the golden tower trembles beneath a sky of unrest, the Republic will face its great reckoning. Some see in that image the shouts echoing through the Capitol on January 6th. Others see the tremors of America's political fault lines, quaking louder with every passing year. Still, Dixon's prophecy was not meant to cast blame or choose sides. Her words were cooler, more detached, as if she were observing a distant battlefield through a spiritual window. What mattered was not the man himself, but the role he would play in the nation's struggle to define its own soul. She wrote that the golden figure would become a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, wrath, and longing of millions. And a mirror, no matter how polished or flawed, forces people to confront the truth they have avoided. This is the part people forget about prophecies. They are rarely about individuals. They are about eras, forces, seasons in history that rise and fall the way tides do. And Dixon saw something, gathering something shaped by politics. Yes, but not born from politics. She saw a storm of identity, faith, and destiny converging on a single man who did not ask to embody it, yet could not escape it either. As America approached the years she marked as dangerous years when 2 meets 6, many wondered whether she meant 2026. A date that now looms not with superstition, but with genuine tension, economic shifts, political fractures, global uncertainty, and a nation still wrestling with itself. And thus the old prophecy awakens, whispering again through the noise of modern headlines. Tonight, the question presses against the edges of the narrative. Did Jeane Dixon truly see Donald Trump? Or did she see America lost, divided, uncertain, reflected through him? The unsettling truth is this: some prophecies do not reveal futures. They reveal patterns. They reveal the moment when a nation's choices narrow into a single corridor, and every step echoes louder than the one before. And in her vision, Dixon saw the golden figure standing at the center of that corridor, his presence illuminating both the path forward and the shadows gathering behind. But what force guided her hand when she wrote those lines? What presence whispered symbols of towers, storms, and fractured republics? In the next moment of the story, we descend deeper into the life of a woman who lived not on the map of this world, but in the thin place between the sacred and the terrifying. To understand the weight of Jeane Dixon's prophecy, you must step back into a life that never truly belonged to the world she lived in. Her story does not begin with fame, or even with ambition, but with a moment that seems almost mythic, a child wandering through an empty hallway. A crystal sphere placed in her small hands by a wandering Romani fortune-teller, who whispered, "One day, you will see." That moment, whether legend or memory, marked the beginning of a path she never asked for yet could never step away from. Born in 1904 in the dust-covered edges of Missouri, Dixon appeared ordinary at first glance. But those who knew her earliest years speak of the moments that made adults pause. Warnings she murmured, dreams she described, names she should not have known. Her mother believed the child had been touched by God. Others whispered a different possibility, that some children are simply close to the veil, and sometimes the veil thins. Whether divine or dangerous, the gift grew with her. And as America entered the age of radio, war, and uncertainty, Dixon's visions began weaving themselves into the nation's subconscious. It started small: advice to friends, private predictions, quiet warnings. But soon, patterns formed, patterns that would place her in rooms where no seer should ever stand. Her prediction of John F. Kennedy's rise and assassination is often retold as if it were a miracle, but few recount the specifics. She described a tall young leader of great influence, who would enter the White House in 1960, only to fall by a bullet that echoes through generations. She gave this warning in 1956 when Kennedy was still a relatively obscure senator. This was not guesswork. It was not extrapolation. It was something else entirely. Then came Monroe. Then the attempted PayPal assassination. Then global tensions she hinted at before they erupted. One by one, her visions seeped into reality, as if the world were tracing the outlines she drew long before it was ready to understand it. But here is the unsettling truth. Dixon never claimed her gift came solely from God. She spoke often of angels, of whisperings in prayer, of sudden flashes of symbolic scenes like paintings hung in the mind. Yet she also admitted that not every vision felt holy. Some left her trembling. Some arrived not with light, but with a coldness she struggled to describe. She once confided to a friend that the spiritual realm was not divided as we imagine. Light and shadow sometimes walk together. This is why too many theologians and skeptics alike, Jeane Dixon became a paradox. A woman who saw too much. A woman who spoke in a language half scripture, half omen. A woman who held prophecy the way others hold a burning coal, aware of its power, aware of the danger, unsure which would consume her first. By the mid-20th century, Washington had taken notice. What most people don't know is that Dixon was summoned quietly, discreetly, by those whose decisions shaped the future of nations. Politicians, military officials, diplomats, men who outwardly dismissed the supernatural, yet privately sought it when the world blurred into uncertainty. Her home became a revolving door of silence. Unmarked cars pulling up at night, footsteps climbing stairs, doors closed behind thick curtains. Inside those meetings, she spoke not in commands but in symbols. She described visions like an observer trapped between worlds. A map with borders dissolving, a black sun rising over eastern waters, a hand gripping a flag until the fabric tears. The officials rarely understood the imagery, yet they returned, again and again. Because somewhere between her metaphors and their fears, Dixon illuminated a reality they sensed but could not articulate. Her strange influence reached so deeply into Washington that even First Lady Nancy Reagan later admitted the White House used Dixon's warnings to schedule key events discreetly, quietly, away from public scrutiny. Critics mocked it, supporters defended it, but the truth remained. The most powerful government in the world listened to a woman who claimed visions from beyond the veil. And it was during these years that Dixon began to change, not outwardly. Her appearance remained the same: elegant clothing, pearls, a soft voice, but inwardly she seemed increasingly burdened, as though the visions pressed upon her with greater weight. She confided that she sometimes felt pulled between two forces, that the spiritual world was not always gentle, that some visions struck her like lightning while others seeped into her dreams with whispers she could not fully recognize. This tension between light and shadow, certainty and fear became the hallmark of her later predictions. It infused her tone with a gravity that unsettled even those who trusted her most. And when she spoke of the future of America, she did so with the solemnity of someone delivering not a forecast, but a warning. Perhaps this is why the prophecy of the golden figure resonated so deeply with those who rediscovered it decades later. Because Dixon did not frame this vision as a political event. She framed it as a spiritual crossroads, a moment when forces beyond the physical would converge upon a single individual, reflecting not their character, but the destiny of the nation watching them. She described America as a land chosen for purpose, yet vulnerable to pride. She warned of a time when the nation would look to a man of great charisma, great ambition, and great influence, believing him to be the solution, the shield, the savior. And yet, in her writings, This man was not the focus. He was the test. Her journals reveal a line written in trembling script. A leader of gold walks the path between blessing and deception. The nation that follows must discern which light he carries. This was not condemnation. It was not endorsement. It was a mirror held up to a people who had lost their own reflection. Dixon lived her final years in a fragile peace surrounded by followers who saw her as a prophet and skeptics who saw her as an anomaly. But even then, she carried the weight of a woman who had seen too far, too clearly, and too often. She once said, "I do not choose what I see. I only choose whether to speak," and as her life drew to a close, there remained one vision she spoke of less and less. The vision of the rising man, the trembling tower, and the year she believed would unveil the nation's spiritual trial. A vision the world now re-examines, not with curiosity, but with dread. In the next part of the story, the shadows lengthen around that prophecy, as Dixon's secret visitors become the bridge to the moment she first described the golden effigy, who would stand at the center of America's greatest test. It is one thing for a prophet to write visions in private. It is another for those visions to draw the quiet footsteps of power to her doorstep. And for Jeane Dixon, the line between mystic and advisor blurred long before the public ever suspected it. The world saw her as a curiosity. Washington saw her as something far more dangerous, an instrument that could reveal what logic could not grasp. The stories of those visits have been whispered for decades. A black sedan, idling under the faint glow of a street lamp. A man in a dark overcoat stepping out, pausing to look around, then climbing the steps to a modest Washington townhouse. Sometimes it was one visitor, sometimes two or three. They arrived at hours meant to avoid attention, twilight or just before dawn, when the world is half asleep and secrets can pass unnoticed. Inside that home, Dixon would greet them without surprise, as though expecting them long before they knocked. The curtains were always drawn, the lights dimmed to a soft amber. Her crystal globe glimmered like a frozen tear upon the table, though she once insisted she did not need it to see. Their conversations were never recorded, but fragments survive, scraps of testimony from aides, memoirs, offhand admissions from those who once served at the edges of American power. They reveal an unsettling pattern. Dixon was asked not about politics, but about destiny. She was asked not who would win elections, but who the nation would become. She spoke in images rather than answers, and her visitors learned to listen between the lines, to feel the weight of a symbol as if it were a coded message. One night in the late 1960s, a senator left her home visibly shaken. He later confided to a colleague that Dixon had spoken of a man of wealth rising to the national stage, a man who would be worshipped by some, despised by others, and watched by all. She described this man not in political terms, but as a figure carved from light, gilded, she said, shining like an effigy cast in gold. At the time, no name came to mind. It seemed too metaphorical, too strange. But Dixon did not speak metaphorically, not in her world. The golden effigy, she explained, would not emerge immediately. His rise would come after the nation wandered through confusion and spiritual forgetfulness. She told her visitors that America's greatest trial would not be foreign invasion, economic collapse, or technological upheaval, though those forces would circle in the air. The true trial would be identity, a crisis of the nation's soul, reflected in the man chosen to stand at its center. She always returned to that symbol, gold, not as wealth, but as a lure. The shining illusion that blinds the eye while something unspeakable moves in its shadow. During one particularly tense meeting sometime in the early 1970s, an intelligence officer asked her directly whether the golden effigy was dangerous. Dixon did not answer at first. She closed her eyes. Minutes passed. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, hollow, as if she were repeating a message she had not fully understood. "He is neither salvation nor destruction," she murmured. "He is the test of what the nation truly desires." The officer pressed her further, but she only shook her head. Later he would write that her expression reminded him of someone watching a fire that had not yet begun to burn. This was the moment her prophecy shifted from political curiosity to classified concern, because Dixon claimed that behind the golden effigy was a presence, an influence, a set of invisible hands guiding, lifting, steadying him at key moments. Not supernatural beings, she insisted, but forces of ambition, ideology, power, forces that viewed America not as a homeland, but as a vessel for their own ends. And she warned that this man, this gilded figure, would rise at a time when the nation was vulnerable to illusion, when truth could be shaped like clay, when fears could be weaponized, when identity itself became a battlefield. Her visitors listened, some believed, some dismissed, but none forgot. From these secret meetings came the first draft of the prophecy that would later be associated controversially, uneasily with Donald Trump, not because Dixon ever spoke his name, she did not, but because her symbols began to align with realities that would not emerge until decades after her death. She wrote of a tower of gold, admired by many for its brilliance, but hollowed by pride. She described crowds chanting a phrase that promised the rebirth of a republic. She mentioned storms gathering over a leader who believed he commanded them, unaware that he was only the lightning rod, not the storm. In one chilling entry she wrote, "The golden effigy ascends not by his own strength, but by the longing of a nation searching for its reflection. And when he stands at the summit, the test begins. Those who knew Dixon insist she did not write in political metaphor. She wrote what she saw, clear, vivid, unmistakable, and what she saw seemed to frighten even her. Some nights after her visitors left, neighbors reported lights flickering in her home long past midnight. They heard pacing, whispers, the sound of a chair pushed abruptly across the floor. Dixon later admitted that some visions left her shaken, as though she had gazed into a place not meant for mortal eyes. One friend recalled a moment when Dixon confided, "This golden one, he shines so brightly that people will not see the shadow behind him until it is too late." When asked what shadow she meant, Dixon only replied, "The shadow of themselves." It was this idea, this mirror effect, that haunted her final years. She believed the golden effigy would embody the nation's inner conflict, pride and fear, hope and disillusionment, faith and fury. A figure not blessed nor cursed, but chosen as the lens through which America would confront its own nature. And so the prophecy deepened, not just about the man, but about the moment he would rise, about the fracture in the Republic, about the trembling tower, about the year when the nation's spiritual crisis would reach its climax. In the next part of the story, Dixon's writings take a darker turn toward the lightning that strikes the tower, the Republic cracking like a mirror, and the warning she left behind about the path the nation must choose before 2026. There are visions that drift like distant storms, far enough to ignore, close enough to unsettle. And then there are visions that strike with the precision of lightning, cracking open the sky to reveal what lies beneath. Jeane Dixon's prophecy of the trembling tower belonged to the latter. It was the moment when her warnings shifted from symbolic whispers to something sharper, heavier, almost accusatory. A message not meant to soothe, but to prepare. In the pages she wrote near the end of the 1970s, pages only rediscovered decades later, Dixon described an image that kept returning to her, unbidden, like a dream that insisted on being remembered. She saw a gleaming tower rising above a crowded city, its exterior mirrored in gold, its height reaching stubbornly into a troubled sky. She wrote of people gathering at its base, some in awe, some in resentment. And above them all, the tower shone like a monument to human ambition, beautiful, proud, fragile. But the vision never ended there. The sky darkened, she wrote, and from the clouds, lightning sought the tower not once, but 3 times. Each strike sent tremors into the land, dividing the people below. It was the phrase 3 times that captured attention. Some dismissed it as poetic flair. Others, especially those who believed Dixon's insights were coded warnings, speculated whether the strikes represented scandals, crises, or political battles yet to come. For many, the image of a golden tower trembling under lightning felt eerily familiar, not because of prophecy, but because of architecture. They thought of Trump Tower, not as a building, but as a symbol, the empire of gold, glamour, and influence that had become synonymous with Donald Trump long before he entered the political arena. And when Dixon's writings described crowds shouting a phrase promising to restore a fallen republic, the connection deepened uncomfortably. "He will promise to make the republic great again." The line sat like a fossil in her journals, dated 1979. Long before the slogan that would electrify a nation in 2016. Skeptics called it coincidence, believers called it confirmation, but even skeptics could not ignore how her imagery echoed the modern world. When she wrote of the Republic cracking like glass, many saw reflections of something far more tangible: the political polarization, the distrust in institutions, the eruption of fury that would eventually culminate in the events of January 6th. The nation's unity, once solid, had indeed splintered into shards, each faction convinced the others were blind. But Dixon's vision dug deeper than politics. She saw not just events, but emotional currents, forces shaping the collective psyche. She wrote of a storm of perception, when truth would no longer be truth, when every screen would display a different version of reality, and when the people would no longer recognize their own reflection in the mirror of the nation. That mirror image, she warned, would fracture. She described a moment when Americans would be unable to see themselves as one people, living instead in parallel realities shaped by fear, pride, and echo chambers that amplified both. In her metaphor, the lightning that struck the tower did not aim to destroy the man associated with it. It aimed to reveal the crack inside the society that had lifted him up. One chilling passage read, "The lightning does not choose the tower. It chooses the fracture hidden within it." This line, poetic as it may sound, became a focal point of debates among those who studied Dixon's prophecies. Did she mean that America's turmoil would not be caused by a single man, but merely exposed by him? Did she imply that Trump, like Kennedy before him, was less the event and more the mirror? Her writings continued, "When the golden tower trembles, the people will face themselves, and the truth will divide them. But what truth? About their politics, their beliefs, their fears?" Dixon never clarified. Instead, she shifted the imagery toward something more mythic, more apocalyptic, a nation standing on a precipice, torn between 2 realities, both of which felt righteous. Some of her notes from the 1980s hint at a shadowed year, described cryptically as "when 2 meets 6." Many interpret this as 2026, a year now approached with unease, not because of superstition, but because of the accumulating pressures all around it. Economic uncertainty, elections, geopolitical tension, and cultural exhaustion. Dixon hinted that the year linked to the trembling tower would be a moment when the nation would confront a choice between illumination and deception. She emphasized repeatedly that the choice would not rest on the shoulders of the golden figure alone. In fact, he was almost secondary. The real battle would be fought in the hearts of the people watching him, judging him, projecting their hopes and fears onto him, as though he were the canvas for an entire country's identity crisis. In another cryptic line from her papers, she wrote, "The effigy of gold reflects not the man, but the multitude behind him." What terrified Dixon was not the possibility of one man carrying destiny. It was the possibility of millions moving blindly in the direction of their own reflection, believing they were following a leader, when in truth they were following the unspoken desires of their fractured society. This was the deeper meaning behind the lightning. The storms she described were not divine punishment or political prophecy. They were moments of revelation, points where the nation would be forced to confront itself. And like a tower struck repeatedly, America would tremble, sway, and groan beneath the weight of forces it thought it understood, yet had long ignored. But Dixon also hinted at a reprieve, a moment of stillness after the storms, when clarity would emerge. She described a gate of mercy that would open only for a short time, allowing the Republic to choose renewal or collapse. Yet even this hopeful image carried shadows, because she believed the window would close as quickly as it opened, and the figure standing nearest to that gate the test, the catalyst. The mirror would be the golden effigy whose rise she had foreseen decades earlier. In the next part of the prophecy, Dixon reveals the final turn, the mirror shattering, the nation losing its own reflection, and the mysterious man standing at the edge of a precipice that could redefine America's destiny before 2026. There are prophecies that warn, there are prophecies that illuminate, and then there are prophecies that judge not by condemning, but by revealing what has always been hidden beneath the surface. Jeane Dixon's final vision belonged to this last category. A mirror placed before a nation that no longer recognized its own reflection. A prophecy that did not speak of war or plague or fire, but of something far more fragile. The soul of a republic stretched thin between truth and illusion. By the time Dixon wrote her last entries, her handwriting had grown unsteady. The elegant loops of her youth had given way, two lines that trembled, as though the weight of what she saw pressed directly onto the page. Those close to her said she often stared into nothingness for long moments, as if listening to some distant voice only she could hear. She spoke less, she prayed more. And when she did write, her tone carried an urgency unlike anything in her earlier prophecies. In one of her final notebooks, she described a vision she called the shattering of the mirror. It was not a literal mirror, but the symbolic heart of America's identity, its shared sense of purpose, the story it told itself about who it was. She saw that mirror cracking, slowly at first, then suddenly in a violent burst. The pieces fell in every direction, each shard reflecting a different version of the truth. No two pieces matched. Each fragment insisted it was the whole. In her words, a nation divided by perception cannot see itself, and a people who cannot see themselves will look to a single figure for clarity, though he himself stands in the fog. This was the moment Dixon turned back to the golden effigy, the figure who had haunted her earlier writings. She did not describe him as a hero, nor as a villain. Instead, she portrayed him as a hinge in history, one that would swing either toward awakening or toward deception, depending not on him, but on the people who placed their hope upon his shoulders. She wrote, "He stands upon the precipice, not as a conqueror, but as a sign of what the nation seeks within itself." To Dixon, this man was a reflection of America's deepest desires: strength, prosperity, identity, nostalgia, renewal. But he was also a reflection of its fears, chaos, decline, betrayal, uncertainty. Whether he realized it or not, he carried both light and shadow in equal measure, because he carried the soul of the Republic in symbolic form. And then, the prophecy took its most ominous turn. Dixon wrote of a specific period, cryptic, understated, yet chilling. She referred to a time when 2 meets 6, a phrase that scholars, believers, and skeptics have debated for years. But to those who found the document in the archives, one possibility overshadowed the rest. 2026, a year that now hovers on the horizon, charged with political tension, economic unease, and the growing sense that something immense is approaching a culmination, a reckoning, a crossroads. In her final prophecy, Dixon described a gateway year, a threshold between eras. She said the nation would face two paths. One path opens to illumination, humility, and renewal. The other opens to deception, pride, and collapse. But the decision would not be made by leaders, she insisted. It would be made by the people themselves, by millions of individual hearts, shaped by fear, anger, hope, and longing. The golden effigy, she said, would stand as the test. Not the cause of the nation's direction, but the measure of it. In one especially haunting passage, she wrote, "He will be raised to great heights by those who see him as their champion. He will be cast down by those who fear his shadow, but neither group will see the truth. for he is only the mirror. This idea that Trump, or the symbolic figure he represents, is less a man and more a reflection forms the core of Dixon's final warning. In a later line, she wrote, "A nation cannot heal what it refuses to see." To her, the coming crisis was not political, but spiritual. Not about parties or ballots, but about clarity about whether Americans would confront the fractures within their own identity before it was too late. And yet Dixon did not end in despair. She described a moment of grace on narrow window, like the eye of a storm, where truth could still be grasped, where unity could still be chosen, where the mirror could be mended. She called it the moment of stillness, a brief pause before history accelerates again, a period when the nation could choose humility over pride, truth over illusion, discernment over fury. But she warned that the window would not remain open long. In the chilling final paragraph of her last manuscript, Dixon wrote, "The golden figure will stand upon the great precipice, his fate entwined with the nation he reflects. The people will watch him, judge him, follow him, reject him, but in the end, the choice will not be about him, it will be about themselves. For the light of the Republic will flicker, but it will not extinguish, unless the people themselves turn away." And so the prophecy ends not with doom, not with triumph, but with a question that lingers like the last echo in a vast cathedral. What will America choose when the mirror shatters? And when the nation stands before the test of 2026, what light will remain? These were Dixon's final words, a warning, a whisper, a plea, the last spark of a prophet who walked the line between divine illumination and terrifying shadow. And though her voice has long since faded, her prophecy remains restless, waiting, awakening once more as the year she hinted at draws nearer, step by inevitable step.